Welcome to Section 4, RESTful API Design Guidelines. Time to look closer into the URLs of the routes and into the return HTTP status code per operation. In this section, we will cover the following topics: endpoints, URLs, and HTTP status codes, best practices among others, extensibility and versioning, and linked data. Let's start with endpoint URLs and HTTP status code best practices. Each RESTful API operation is a combination of an HTTP request against a URL and an appropriate HTTP method. When executed, each operation will return a status code indicating whether the invocation has been successful or not. Successful invocation is indicated by a HTTP 200 status code, while operations that are not executed correctly indicate this with erroneous status code 400 if the error is at the client side, or 500 when the server fails to process a valid request. Having a well-specified API is vital for its adoption. Such specification should not only completely enumerate the status codes of each operation, but should also specify the expected data format, that is, its supported media types. The following table defines how the Express.js router will expose the API operations on our contacts, and it should serve as a reference specification for it. So now let's update the API endpoints. Back into our code editor, we will first modify our contact model. Go to the contact.models.js files inside the models folder. Then, in the Mongoose schema constructor call, we will add a second parameter, which is an object containing a version key property set to false. This will allow to generate documents without the annoying --v property, which we do not use. Now, let's go to our contacts controller. Because we now use Mongoose to retrieve and to insert data, we will need to make some modifications into our getContacts controller. First of all, when we iterate over the received contacts from MongoDB, we want to retrieve the plain JavaScript object and not the Mongoose documents, which contains a lot of properties and methods which do not help us when displaying HTML. In order to get the plain JavaScript object, use the -doc property of the Mongoose document. This will give you the contact without any additional methods and properties from the framework. Now, on this document, we will extract the ID, and then we will create another object which will have the rest of the properties. Next, we want to have our properties displayed in a sorted order. For this, we will get the keys on our contacts using the object keys method, which will return an object containing the keys inside our contact object. Then we will use the sort method, which is a native JavaScript method for arrays. This will sort our keys in alphabetical order. Then we will use the reduce method to generate a contact with the properties sorted alphabetically. For this, inside our iterator function, we use the accumulator as the first argument and the key, which will be the current element when iterating over the array of keys, and then we return an object which destructors the accumulator, which will correspond to an object containing all the properties of our contact. And then we insert the new property and we retrieve the value of this property from the original document. By the way, syntax is a computed field of an object. And this will be the initial value of our accumulator. So at the end, we will have an object containing the first name and the last name as the first properties, and the rest of the properties alphabetically sorted. So this is a way how you can order the properties in your objects. Finally, we will display our object like previously, except that in order to not have the _id property display, we will use the JSON stringify method with a replacer. The replacer will look at the current value, and if this value in our case is an object, it will have a key and the corresponding value. And if the key corresponds to a MongoDB ID, we will set the value to undefined. And then any value set to undefined into the JSON will not be computed when received by our client. Next, into our getContact controller, we will check if there is a contact ID into the parameters of our request. Otherwise, we will return a 400 error. This HTTP code corresponds to a bad request. So this means that the request was malformed. Otherwise, if the length of our contact ID is not a MongoDB object ID string, we will return a 422 error, which means that this request is not processable. So basically, the request is correct, but the value inside it, we are not able to process. Next, inside the post contact, we do pretty similar things. Here we check on the body if the contact contains a primary contact number, otherwise return an error for unprocessable request. Then, when we create our new contact, we can check that a valid document was returned. And for this, we look if this document contains our primary contact number. Otherwise, we return a 500 error saying that no contact was created. And this is pretty similar code in the rest of our controllers. Also, for the post many contacts, the logic has been a little modified. For this, instead of generating a fixed number of fake contacts, we will make it dynamic by passing a query parameter that we will retrieve, and which will be a number corresponding to the number of fake documents to create. By the way, here we put a guard saying that we will not create more than 100 documents per request. For this, we need to modify our contact generator.js file inside the utils folder. Instead of returning a map with a fixed number of fake contacts, we will return a fake contact generator function, which will have a default number fixed to 3. Otherwise, it will create as many fake contacts as we pass as argument. And the logic is similar in other controllers. So now, let's go to Postman. If we do a GET request on the /contacts endpoint and set the accept header to text HTML, remember that we will receive a HTML document, and here you can see our different contacts with the first name and the last name first, and the other properties being displayed in alphabetical order. Also, in the social media array, we no longer have the underscore ID property inside the objects. You can get more information about HTTP endpoint and status code best practices by going to this link.